Welcome to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, recovery coach professional. Do you love food, alcohol, drugs, sex, social media, cigarettes, or gambling a little too much? The traditional narrative says that addiction to these vices is the problem. The truth is, they are just symptoms. This hit show takes you from recovery to your ultimate life as my special guests and I help you discover how underneath every vice is the addiction to the suffering that developed due to unhealed trauma. So what can you do? Hungry for Answers provides groundbreaking, proven solutions from my best-selling spiritual book, Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. It's time to stop suffering and start living your ultimate life. You have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. Hungry for Answers starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Robin Clare, and welcome to Hungry for Answers. Because I was so hungry for answers in my own life with my battle with food addiction, I wrote my best-selling book, Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. And then that led to this thought-provoking radio show. So stay with us for the next hours as my guests and I talk about pain and why it can be a gift in your life. So today, I have Barry Grant here to discuss how the pain that we experience can be a gift and a catalyst in our life for change. Barry is the director of Outpatient Services at Hope House Treatment Centers and co-owner of S.A.F.E Consulting and Counseling Services. And so I love to always add a little personal story. I was driving home from New Jersey one day and I was listening to NPR and I heard Barry speak and I was so blown away by what he was saying. I felt like I was actually talking to my radio while he was speaking and I was like, yes, Barry, if I was sitting in your chair, I would have said the same thing. And I did this for the entire interview. I was like cheering him on and I was cheering what he was saying. And so as soon as I got home, I went to LinkedIn to see if I could find Barry A. Grant. And there he was. And I asked him to become my colleague on LinkedIn. And we've been chatting ever since. So let's welcome Barry to the show. Hello, Barry.
Hi, Robin. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. So the show is called Hungry for Answers, and I'm wondering if you can share with our audience a time in your life where you were so hungry for answers that it seemed almost like this situation would be impossible to solve.
Well, in answering that question, it's a matter of my search for identity, a search for belonging, a search for who I was, and I was inside of the throes of addiction deeply. And it seemed that my beliefs and abilities and level of creativity were stunted by my own thinking. And I just could not get out of it. And the more that I would get deeper into the drug use, the more I was conflicted because I knew that was not who I was, but I did not know how to transition out of it. And that quagmire, it brought a great deal of suffering, not only to myself, but to everyone within my circle, social circle, familial circle, and anyone else who I interacted with. And at the core of it, it was my own suffering that I had to bear.
Yeah, and I think this is what connected us to begin with, is this idea that in Feast and Famine, the idea, as many of you know, I wrote this book at the request of the Holy Spirit, Sophia, and she said to me that there's only one true addiction on the planet, and that's to suffering. And then we choose our vice or our habit or whatever we have to to not to perpetuate the suffering, but to wallow in our pain. And when you first, I mean, you knew this, Barry, because you're someone that I admired. But what did you think about the idea that our true addiction is to suffering?
Well, this is something that I've been contemplating on for quite some time, as a matter of fact. And, you know, I like to examine the etymology, the origin of words and the language that we use to describe ourselves, because ultimately it's that language that we provide ourselves with either negative or positive self-talk. So, that addiction addicted comes from the Latin addictus, which is to betray or to abandon or to sell out or even to sacrifice. And suffering is to endure from below, to tolerate. So putting those two together today, I mean, addiction, as we know in modern times, is a compulsive physiological or psychological dependence on something or someone else. And we go inside of ourselves to fulfill an essential need with something synthetic. So I say that to say, that this is really nothing new, and it's been around for thousands of years. I mean, we look at some of the great religions. The Buddha actually said that life is suffering. The Israelites were suffering at the hands of the Pharaoh. Christ was suffering on the cross, and what happened? Yeah, and what ultimately happened is Buddha found out through his recognition of enlightenment that he could transition out of it, out of that suffering. The Israelites transitioned to the promised land. Christ transitioned from crucifixion to resurrection, and we transition from those dark nights within our soul to a new way of thinking, to an understanding of ourselves that can allow us the permission. And that's what we need, an emotional permission from ourselves to alleviate the suffering and come out from under it and find inner peace and happiness. It's what you think of experience that determines how you experience the experience.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And so I had to pull out Feast and Famine. There were some thoughts in it that at the beginning of each chapter, I would ask Sophia, what are your thoughts on this? And through meditation, I would receive a message from her. So on this chapter, chapter 12, she talks about the idea that pain is inevitable. And I'm just going to read this page. And it says, Sophia, what can you share with us about pain that should prevent us from turning pain into suffering? And she replied, you have an interesting phrase on the earth plane. There are only two events that you can count on happening, and they are death and taxes. Clearly, you can count on pain too. I am not saying that to make you feel worse. I am saying that to relax you into the pain because it is inevitable. And this is the part I love. Do what you can to heal it and do not allow it to consume you. It is in pain's consumption of you that suffering begins. Most important, you cannot recover from a place of focusing on the pain. You must focus on the healing and how you feel when the pain is gone. This simple manifesting tool can help you to not move into suffering, even if you are in great pain. And I just love that, because I do believe that if we focus on the healing, that is what stops us from going into the suffering. Because the second part of Sophia's divine healing path, the first sentence is pain is inevitable. The second is suffering is an option. And I believe that when we're in the pain, and if we can focus on the healing, that maybe we can avoid the suffering. What do you think about that?
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying there. Pain is indeed inevitable. And it's interesting how things in a spiritual world mimic, or should I say, things in a physical world mimic our spiritual experience. And even though we go through pain, growing pain is to be expected in all healthy organisms. And in the long run,
Mm-hmm.
growth pain is good for us all. Pain is an indicator that something needs to be adjusted, that something
Yes.
is happening that requires our attention. Without it, we'd be in quite a position that that wouldn't be comfortable, to say the least. With pain, it teaches us lessons. Forget about what it looks like. What is it teaching you? And
Yes.
those lessons that we learn are important in moving through not only the suffering, but reminding us of what behavior, what not to repeat. When we
Yes.
go through pain, we want to get through to the other side of through, but remember what it was from a personal standpoint. It's the changes that transform our lives that are often born of the suffering that is itself a reason for change.
Yes, that's great. So, one of the things that Barry and I also have in common is a book that we both loved. So, this book, I
Ah,
heard about this
yeah.
book, and so did Barry on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. And Oprah was interviewing the author, and Oprah says, I'd like to welcome Dr. Edith Eva Egger to the show. And she
Mm-hmm,
said, hello, Dr. Egger. And Dr. Egger said, hello, Oprah. She had me at hello.
mm-hmm.
I didn't even listen to the interview. I just immediately went out and bought this book that was life changing. It's called The Choice: Embrace the Possible by Dr. Edith Eva Egger. It's a Holocaust survivor story and about a woman who survived the Holocaust by doing something that her mom said to her. And that was that no matter what happens here in Auschwitz, they cannot control what's inside your mind. And so what she did is that she decided that she would have this vision of what her life would be like after the Holocaust. And she held that. She held that through the entire time. And so one of the quotes from Dr. Egger that I love is
Mm-hmm.
this idea that, sorry, hold on, I lost my little page here. That, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I can't find it. Where is it? Anyway, tell us more what you liked about this book, Barry. What was it about it that meant a lot to you?
The resilience and the ability to look at someone else's suffering. I have a daughter, my youngest daughter, Megan, and in the depths of some things that she would go through, she would say, Dad, you know what? My pain diminishes when I look into someone else's. And
Yes.
that's the same thing that I find in that book. There's a point in there where she's helping she gets some bread and something else from the guards, and at the same
Mm-hmm.
time she shares that immediately with someone else.
Yes. Yes. That's beautiful. Beautiful. Oh, I found the quote,
All
which
right.
I loved, and I'm sorry I have to do it. It's sometimes our pain pushes us, and sometimes our hope pulls us. And
Ah,
I really tried to visualize what would that look like. And I think it talks to what you're talking about here, Barry. Like sometimes our pain is like a catalyst. It pushes us forward. But at the same time, our hope is pulling us to resolution or solution. So it's
mm-hmm.
almost like they're working together, the push and the pull. And I just thought, what a beautiful quote. And I really think that it sums up what we're talking about. But we're going to go to a break now. And you're listening to Hungry for Answers with Robin Clare and my guest, Barry Grant. And we will be right back. Thank you so much. And we're back on Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. For more information on my work and my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com. Today, my guest is Barry Grant, who is talking with us about the gift of pain in our lives. But before we continue, Barry, can you tell everybody how they can connect with you?
Absolutely. You can connect with me at S.A.F.E Counseling Services, LLC.com or risewithbarry.com.
Risewithbarry.com. And in your S.A.F.E Counseling Services, you do that with your fiance, you said. Is that correct?
I do. She handles the mental health side, and I handle the addiction side. I mean, it's a good marriage because one can be a correlation to the other. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and this is very befitting of our discussion. We're seeking outside of ourselves to fulfill an essential need, and then we begin to medicate ourselves or believe that we need to be medicated. And in a society that is always looking for instant gratification, it's not only a mental health question, but it's a question of whether or not we indulge ourselves in something else that might help us to get back to a balance through chemical means. And we are not at S.A.F.E Counseling proponents of medication right away, because there is a natural pathway back to oneself. Uh, that acronym
Yeah.
is for our organization, Self Authentically Forever Evolving.
Yeah. And it's interesting in Feast and Famine, when I was looking at chapter 12 again in preparation for today's segment, one of the things we talked a lot about in the book was burnout. And burnout is really a serious thing for
Mm-hmm.
most people. There's a state of exhaustion for all of us, and then it perpetuates uh, other forms of addiction, right? So when you're burnout, you're probably typically overcompensating for something, trying to feel, you're working too hard or you're doing something. Maybe you're even addicted to the suffering of working too hard. And then what
Yes.
happens is, to be able to feel better about that, you'll start having too much coffee or too much chocolate or too much wine at night. And so there's this whole idea of really looking at your mind, body, spirit, and emotion, and making sure that you're in balance and not in a state of burnout. And so another thing that we talk about in the book is this idea of resting and how important it is to rest. And I think in our society, we think that resting is not a good thing. In fact, I find myself too, like if I'm resting, I'm like, "Oh, what else could I be doing? What do I need to get done?" And so I had a really interesting client come in one time. I am an Akashic record reader. It's what I do with some of my clients. And the Akashic records are the home of your soul's past, present, and future lifetime information. And it was really one of my first Akashic record readings. And this woman comes in and she sits down with me and she's like, "I just retired and I'd like to know what I'm supposed to do next." And so I opened the Akashic records where her soul's collective is supposed to tell me all this information to share with her. It's nothing. It's like silence. And so I start panicking because I'm really new.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
start doing some energy healing work on her because I'm also trained as an energy healer. I'm doing some thinking like, oh, maybe this, if I connect with her more on an energy level, maybe the words will come. And as I'm going around her and I come forward, I see four letters appear energetically on her across her chest area. REST.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit down and I said, "I'm so sorry to say, but all I'm getting out of your records are one word, and the word is rest." And she opened her
Mm-hmm.
eyes and she said, "Well, I told you that I retired, but I didn't tell you that my daughter is very ill, and I didn't tell you that I just got divorced." And she said, "I really came here looking for permission to rest." And she said,
Ah.
"I got exactly what I needed from you, Robin. Thank you so much." And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, phew. But it's an interesting story because we have all of these things in our lives that can create pain. And then, so what are we doing to rest so that we don't experience burnout? And so, Barry, I want to go back to your addiction story. So, can you describe the inherent pain in your addiction story?
Uh, Excuse me. again, it was that longing for a sense of identity,
Mm-hmm.
and the pain that was there was born of a loss. You know, at the core of addictive behavior is the seeking outside of yourself to fulfill an essential need, and be it physically, spiritually, socially, emotionally, or intellectually slash educationally. We tend to fill that lack with something or someone else, and not being
Mm.
fulfilled is the inherent pain,
Yes.
and yet not being fulfilled. And you know, when we don't have a purpose, when purpose is unknown, abuse is inevitable, and that becomes self-abuse with substances born of the suffering. We many times create our own pain through the trauma that we bring to ourselves, and not to diminish or minimize the exterior pain that we might experience psychologically,
Right.
but there is no jailer as efficient as he or she who is incarcerated by their own thinking.
Oh, always, always. And, even as someone who I call myself living an examined life, like I have done a lot of work to be in recovery, and I am still in therapy to live a grounded life in recovery. And it's really amazing how much our thoughts can influence our recovery. And our thoughts become our feelings, right? And
Mm-hmm.
our feelings become our actions.
That's right.
And our actions become our things, meaning what we manifest in this life. So it really all begins with finding a better feeling thought. I've studied the law of attraction for years and years and years, and it's really amazing. There's something called the emotional scale. And so at the
Mm-hmm.
very bottom of the scale is despair. At the very top is joy. And then there's a whole plethora of emotions. So above despair would be anger. And according to the teachings of Abraham, the law of attraction, anger is better than despair because anger is a catalyst, right?
Indeed.
Despair just is a downer, like you don't want to do anything. So did you find, Barry, that there was like a catalyst like anger for you or despair that made you realize that you had to find this identity in yourself and what you were looking for?
Well, excuse me. As a matter of fact, I did, and it's very interesting and appropriate that you segued into this through rest. In my addiction, I had to rest, but I didn't rest, and I was forced to rest by the local Department of Corrections. And it
Mm-hmm.
was in that forced rest, in that pain, that I found a catalyst, such as pain, as something to perpetuate my coming back to who I was instead of continually operating out of who I was not. So it
Mm-hmm.
was that finding of myself through the pain that reminded me of who I was and allowed me to give myself that emotional permission to move on from the identity disturbance that I'd created. And when we talk about recovery, it's not only recovery of the talent, skills, abilities, and gifts that you inherently had, it's recovery from the traumatic experiences that we created. I mean, we are the problem, but the solution to the problem is in the problem. You don't look outside of yourself. If you don't go within, you go without. And then it's discovery
Oh,
of
I
the
like
things
that.
you never knew.
Yeah, and this going inside is so critically important because that's the only place where the answer is.
That's right.
Everything that we need to know for our lives is already inside of us. But we have to quiet ourselves and we have to quiet our mind in order
Rest.
to be able to do that. We have to rest, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in that, what I loved about moving into this state of examining my life is that it allowed me to the other people in my life who I thought were the problem, It allowed me to see them differently. It allowed me to forgive them. It allowed me to accept that they're doing the very best that they can. I never felt I needed to condone anyone's behavior. I just recognized that they were part of a play in the play of my life.
That's right.
And that I basically asked them to play that role. And some gave Tony Award-winning performances and continue to do that. But that was my choice. And I believe on the soul level, we bring these people in, they help us to live this life, and then we examine it. And then if we're blessed, like you and I are, we get to use this information to help serve others. And we'll get into that in one of the other segments, but there is so much light at the end of the tunnel. And we're going to go to a break now. But when we come back, Barry and I are going to talk more about the gift of pain in your life. So stay tuned, everybody. So we're back on Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. And so for more information on my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com. So we have our first giveaway to the first caller to 1-800. Oh my goodness, I don't have the number. Sorry about that. 1-800. Well, it's right there. It should be right there on the screen. And you will get a copy of my book, Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. So I have Barry Grant talking about how pain can be a catalyst for recovery. So Barry, I was sharing with you that I just saw that Oprah has a new book out. And it's really called What Happened to You? And I thought it was just so interesting. There was a quote from her marketing that I loved. It said, "What I know for sure is that everything that has happened to you was also happening for you. And in all of those moments, you were building strength. So strength times strength equals power. What happened to you can also be your power." So what do you think about that? What happened to you? So before you answer that, Barry, basically she said, most people, when things happen to them, when they have a lot of pain, they think there's something wrong with them. And so this book is trying to get out of the mindset that something is wrong with you, but more that something happened to you. And this experience happened to you. And not that it happened to you, but it also can happen for you as a way to grow and become the most powerful person you can. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, basically, it's a transformation of circumstances. I mean, the circumstances at any given time are only a reflection of your consciousness. And it's essential for us in moving through pain and seeing pain as a catalyst to look at it through the lens of another level of consciousness that thinks outside of the box or of what the world would have us thinking. You know, belief systems block all vision of reality except what they're conditioned to accept. That's sort of like we have blinders on. But once we can see beyond what appears to be, to see the truth behind it, then we can set ourselves free. I mean, when it comes down to it, when we experience something, we experiencing according to these thought systems that we've been trained to believe in. And we've got to get out of that in order to come back to who we are. I mean, there's a saying, in order to come back to your senses, you've got to get out of your mind. So yes.
And,
so,
or change your mindset, right? Is I think what you're saying.
Mindset.
Change your mindset, because it's very easy to stay stuck in the mindset that life is happening to you.
That's
versus
right.
Life is happening for you. And especially if you don't have, or you haven't developed the tools by working, I hope everybody in recovery is working with a professional about recovery, either a recovery coach or a therapist or a life coach, energy healer, their clergy, someone who's been trained to help them to shift their mindset, because that is the key, I believe, is allows you to have the confidence that you need to stay in grounded recovery.
Well, I've been working with oh gosh, I'm on the board of what's called Smart Recovery, and I've been a part of that organization. It's a nonprofit organization since 1996, and their inception was in 1994, and that carried me through the time that I was in prison. And when I got out, I continued to write for them. And SMART is an acronym for self management and recovery training. And it's based on a cognitive behavioral therapy model, a rational emotive behavioral therapy model, motivational interviewing. And it has 4 points of focus: building and maintaining motivation. What reason do you have to change, and how are you going to sustain and maintain that change? Coping with the urges to use or involve yourself in whatever the activity was, and managing thoughts and feelings and behaviors, as you said before. And indeed, it is the thought that leads to the belief that leads to the behavior that leads to the consequences also, because to be sure,
Yes.
when you choose your behavior, you choose your consequences.
You
And finally,
do.
the 4th point is a lifestyle balance: rest,
Rest.
work, recreation, recreation of who you are, and allow yourself to be. It's not so important what are you doing, but who are you being? Are you being kind, compassionate, loving, forgiving, and unconditionally understanding with yourself? And as you said, the law of attraction is always working. It's also called the law of sympathetic resonance. And what you put out will come back to you with astounding accuracy.
It will, it will. And so what would you say, Barry, what did grace look like for you in your life to help you enter and sustain recovery?
Oh, Robin, grace is always there for us, but we must be willing to see it when it appears.
Yes.
Grace was being incarcerated. Grace was being offered 30 years with a 15 stipulation, but then being able to read and work through the system and give that amount of time back. Grace was being able to communicate with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention while I was inside and provide health information resources to other prisoners. Grace was realizing the gentleman who couldn't read and taking my time out to help him learn to read, and at the same time realizing that I needed to be humbled myself. Grace was being able to get a job as a writer for an organization that helped ex-offenders and ultimately become a counselor, which set me up for where we are today. So grace is like one thing is happening and you can make a choice in that direction, but for whatever reason, something sends you in a different direction and you go with that because you know that you know that you know.
Well, and, to bring it to all of our listeners, I totally agree with you. Grace, first of all, is around us 24/7. We just have to pay attention. So it's not like, do I deserve grace? It's just always there. It's always there. We are grace. And so therefore, grace resides inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves. So there is the grace that lies within, and then there's the grace that shows up in our lives that we've attracted in. One of the things that's interesting in Feast and Famine that Sophia said was that grace must be allowed. And I love that, because for many people, we play a role in our family, or we play a role in what we believe to be our community. It is our community, but the role that we believe we're playing is really how I want to say that. And so we may not be open to receiving grace because that would just change everything. And then who would I be? And
we haven't gotten the lesson.
Yes. Oh, that too. Yes, you may not see the grace until you actually, because pain and struggle will stay with you until you learn the lesson.
And if you
I
don't
know
get
it.
the lesson, it will re-present itself.
Right, which then leads to, so the four key healing points in Feast and Famine is pain is inevitable, suffering is an option, which we've
Mm-hmm.
chatted about. The third is surrender is required, which means that there's no hopeful thinking if you would like grace to arrive and allow it in. You have to surrender. And as you and I know, Barry, surrender is not wishful thinking. It's not like, oh, I wish this would go away. Surrender for me was a very bad experience with my bulimia where I could see that if I did it again, I might die. And so for me, it was like, I will never do that again. It's like this. I know everybody has surrendered. Sometimes they're not sure what it is, but it's this just powerful exclamation that your divine knows that you mean business. What do you think about surrender?
I think surrender and finding self-empowerment are synonymous.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we
Yes.
achieve so little because we lack discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And once we realize that the direction in which we're going is not going to bring about a true knowing of who we are, we have to surrender the things that are operating within the energy of our lower self and empower ourselves to rise up and be who we truly are. We're, since the day of our birth, we're always in ascension to come back to who we really are.
Right. Which
We
is
just,
our divine self,
that's right. That's absolutely
right?
right.
Our soul self.
Mm-hmm.
To
Mm-hmm.
come back, because I truly believe that the true meaning of life is to be able to rise up, like you said, to this higher self. There's so many names for it, right? Higher self, soul being,
Mm-hmm.
divine self, spiritual being, to rise
That's
up
right.
to as high as you can in your knowing of your true essence and
That's
becoming
right.
that, and then living that way as a human being. So there's where the challenge is, right? Nothing's changed in your life, basically, and people are still doing the same thing, but
But
you have
everything,
changed. You've
yeah.
changed. My mentor has a wonderful expression that I love. So you've changed, right? You're doing your work, you're doing it, and then you're excited because you've changed and you want to live in that changed way. And then you tell someone about it that you love, and they do something that is so counter to that, like from the old days, right? And she
Mm-hmm.
said, when they do that, which is to be expected because they haven't changed, only
That's right.
you've changed. She said that you should always say to yourself, I'm not surprised. And that little phrase almost takes the sting out of it and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
reminds you that you've done the work and maybe they have not done the work. But what really has happened is that you haven't done the work together, so they don't know that you may have made
That's
this
right.
change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it really becomes, um, I love that. I'm not surprised. It saved me many times in many conversations where I
Yes.
wanted to be like, what? I'm not doing that anymore. And instead of doing that, I'm like, I say to myself, I'm not surprised. How can I frame this so that we can grow together? And it's an interesting way of being. So we're going to go to break again. So you're listening to Hungry for Answers with Robin Clare and Barry Grant, and we'll be right back. So we're back on Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and I am here with Barry Grant. And I'm going to give away my book again because now I have the 800 number. So the 800 number is 800-930-2819, and we'll take the first caller. And then we also are giving away a a 30-minute consultation with Barry Grant about your addiction and recovery experience. So again, the same 800 number, 800-930-2819. And you can just say, if you get through, which one you'd like as the first caller. So this segment is our last segment, Barry, and it's about, as you know, the name of the podcast is Hungry for Answers, From Recovery to Your Ultimate Life. And the idea for this podcast was that many people think that recovery is the end of the line and that they're so grateful to be in recovery. And I understand that completely. I'm so grateful to be in recovery, and I know you are too. But there's so much you can do beyond recovery. And so I love this last segment because I think it allows people to see that people can take their recovery story, like my wonderful guests, and do something to help others. So, what do you think, Barry, is how someone would define their ultimate life purpose and plan? What did that feel like to you, and how would you recommend that someone do that?
So, knowing your purpose is essential. And as I said before, when purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. Knowing your purpose means that you hear the calling from within yourself. I mean, it's pretty basic. This is Latin, vocare. This is the calling, your vocation. And a lot of times what happens here is, we have parents or other individuals that may be around the child, and the child is developing just in who they are. And you say, no, stop, don't do that. Or, oh, no, well, you need to go on it because you'll never make it. And then that becomes the suppressor to what those talents and skills are. And when you are allowed the opportunity by the universe, you won't sit comfortably within it because it hasn't been developed. My thoughts on what you said is to follow your calling from within. And it's not that you don't know, it's remembering that you do know. And
so if we take that further and say that we are a soul being having a human being experience, and prior to this incarnation, our soul decided what it wanted to accomplish. And so we talked earlier about calling in all the players, right? That would inspire us, that would drive us crazy, that would do all types of things to us, that would set up situations that were both wonderful and extraordinary growth opportunities. And our soul has been leading the way our entire life. And we talked a little bit too about the idea that nothing goes away until your soul feels you've gotten the understanding of it. You'll be like, why does this keep happening to me? When that happens to you, everybody, look at what it is that you have to learn from it. But your soul is guiding you to fulfill your ultimate purpose. And so to understand that purpose from the soul level, it's when you're committed to doing that, and you can tell me what you think about this, Barry, it's like you can't not do it. Everything conspires in your life to make sure that you get there, right?
That's absolutely right.
People show up. Yeah, go ahead, please.
The soul is the purpose, and the spirit is the energy. Things are inspired before they become informed. And when we know we are on purpose with that inspiration, that is where suffering and passion meet and walk hand in hand, because you will go through the necessary suffering in order to fulfill your passion. And your passion is your purpose. And knowing that you're connected to the creator allows you to do that, because it's not only the source, you then become resourceful.
Yes, resourceful. Yes, I like that. I never thought of it that way, as resource.
That's why I'm here. That's good. No, I'm just.
I know. I love your little antidotes like that. And so, so do we have any recommendations for people to to allow grace into their life so that they can that they can achieve their ultimate destination or a purpose or a lifestyle. Like we talked about grace in the form of helping them into recovery, but what type of grace should they be looking for, perhaps, in order to fulfill their soul's destiny, their ultimate life?
Knowing yourself allows you to navigate in truth. So when someone comes to me in my professional milieu, I ask them, who are you? And after they run the gamut of telling me the things that they do and also who they are not, then we begin to do some deep investigative exploration into just who you are and why are you here? What is it you like to do? What inspires you? How do you feel? Not what do you think about yourself? And I mean, truly, if you don't go within, you go without.
Yeah, yeah. I was working on a presentation and they said, who is Robin Clare? And I was like, oh, radio host, writing coach, all these different things. And I'm thinking, that is not who is Robin Clare. But I figure for this exercise, I need to answer that way because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for what credentials do I bring to the table. But I was laughing because after spending so much time examining my life, I know who Robin Clare is. But I was just laughing that I'm answering it this other way. But I think we have to know both of those, really. We have to know who we are on the heart level, but we also need to know what gifts and talents we have acquired. And there's a session that I do with clients called the Soul Plan. And what I have discovered is that with the soul leading the way, there's almost like a golden thread that ties together all of our experiences. And so seeing that, I think what most of my people take away from that is that there have been no mistakes, and that you've made no mistakes because you've been following your soul's direction. So how are you, Barry, living your ultimate life in service to others?
I am an instrument of transformation, and I allow myself to be the vent for others who are coming through. As you just said, everything happens for a purpose. My purpose is to be a guiding light for those who are still in the darkness, but don't necessarily know how to do it. Like you said, also, we're all here on assignment, and the assignment is to experience the ultimate in learning for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's great. And for me, I help people who have an amazing recovery story write their book and hopefully create it into a best-selling book. And you and I have talked about that. We'll get to that, Barry. You and I together writing your amazing book. But
your book needs to be written. Your book needs to be read, though. That book is awesome. Please,
thank you.
You all got to get that book.
Yeah, Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. It took a lot of courage on my part to tell my story. I shocked a lot of people, but hopefully it's helpful. So listen, everyone, if you're suffering and struggling with addiction, please know that healing, recovery, and living your ultimate life are possible for you. Know that you are never alone. You can seek traditional help, and you can also connect to your inner wisdom and spiritual guidance. So please sign up for my free 30-minute consultation to discuss transforming your inspiring life story into a best-selling book at clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com. And so I want to thank my guest today, Barry Grant, for sharing such wonderful information and heartfelt knowledge and wisdom. And I want to thank you all for tuning in to Hungry for Answers. On our next segment, we have Reverend Mark Anthony Lord, who will be talking with us about could humiliation and shame be the root of addiction? So thank you all very much, and stay well and stay connected. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into Hungry for Answers. Learning to love ourselves is the one true solution to addiction.
Make a commitment to healing today and see how you can reach your ultimate potential. Remember, you have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. To learn more about me and my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's Clare, CLARE-ITY.com. See you next time.